Welcome back everyone. Today we're going to be making a sling bag backpack. This bag measures in at 14 by 8 with a 6-inch depth, making it the perfect size for all your daily essentials. It's also a very easy bag to assemble with minimal steps and panels. So if you're new to sewing, you should have no problem following along. With all that being said, don't forget to grab the printable PDF pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you'll need 1 yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a nylon, denim, canvas, or twill. These are all very durable fabrics and they're easy to work with. For this video, I'm going to be using an upholstery fabric. These are on the trickier side to use because they're very unpredictable, so if you use something like this, just proceed with caution. But like always, use whatever fabric that's really going to make your design come together. You'll need 1 yard for your secondary fabric, and this is going to be for the lining, so I recommend using a lighter weight fabric. I'm going to be using a lightweight nylon. It's very easy to work with. It makes for a durable inside. And once you start stacking all these layers together, those seams don't get too bulky. You'll need 1 to 2 yards of 1-inch width webbing. This is going to be used for the strap and also the loops on the strap if you want to add those too. Going along with that webbing, you'll need 2 D-rings, 2 lobster clasps, and 1 strap slider. These are also going to be used to create the strap and allow you to clip it to either side for carrying. And remember, you want all your hardware to be 1-inch width to match your 1-inch width webbing. So if you end up changing the size of your webbing, just make sure you change the size of your hardware too. You'll need 1 30-inch zipper. This is a little bit bigger than the actual size of the opening because we want to go past the ends and trim it in. So I'm going to be cutting mine off of a zipper roll. I found this was a great way to go and it saves a ton of waste. And lastly, you'll need the pattern. The pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it off, tape it together, and you're ready to go. And before you tape your pattern together, the best thing to do is to cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is going to allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. Once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting.
And after taping your pattern together, it should look like this. Be sure to check your printer alignment for the best possible results. And from here, we're going to cut on the outside of the black line. Once you cut out all the panels, you should end up with 2 strap panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 top size zipper panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric, both cut on the fold. 2 bottom side zipper panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric, 1 cut out of your main fabric, both cut on the fold. 2 main front bottom panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 main front pocket panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 main front top panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 inside pocket panels, both cut out of your secondary fabric. And lastly, 2 main back panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. Moving on to construction, we're going to start by grabbing the main front pocket panel. Lay the panels out with right sides facing up, locate the top edge, and we're going to place the right sides together and stitch the top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching, we're going to flip the wrong sides together, lining up the secondary and main fabric layers. Feel free to press the seam to make it nice and neat, and then we're going to add 2 top stitches to that top edge. Quickly double check to make sure everything is lined up and the stitch is neat, and for the moment we can place the pocket assembly off to the side. Next, we're going to grab the main front bottom panel, separate the panels with right sides facing up. Using the pattern, we're going to locate the pleats and place the right sides together. And to get a nice accurate stitch, I recommend pinning the layers together. With the pins in position, we're going to stitch each pleat at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Push the pleats so the right side is facing out, double check the length and the bottom edge, make sure it's lined up and they're all the same length. Slide them to the side and grab your main front top panel and your pocket assembly from the previous step. Line up the wrong sides for the main front top panel. Then we're going to place the pocket assembly directly on top, lining up the bottom edge. And lastly, the main front bottom panels will sandwich both the layers with right sides together. Once you have all the layers lined up, we're going to stitch that bottom edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching, flip the main front bottom panel so the wrong sides are together. Locate the seam and we're going to add a top stitch directly on top of the seam allowance on the main front bottom panel side. Double check to make sure all the layers are lined up and the stitches are looking good, and from here we can place this main front assembly off to the side. Moving on, locate your top side zipper panels, lay them out with right sides facing up. Using the panel, find the zipper edge, and this is going to be the long flat edge on the bottom side of the panel. Grab your 30+ inch zipper, and keep in mind this zipper has to be longer than the width of the panels. I just find it to be a little bit easier to trim the ends after stitching everything together. But anyways, we're going to place the right side of the zipper to the right side of the main fabric and the wrong side of the zipper to the right side of the secondary fabric and stitch the zipper at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching, flip the wrong sides together, lining up the top edge of both of the panels. And I find it best to place a few pins along that top edge after lining it up so it doesn't move around as you're adding your top stitch. And it's very important these layers are perfectly lined up. From here, we're gonna add our top stitch along the zipper edge. And like always, double check both sides, make sure the stitch is nice and neat. If everything is looking good, we can move on and grab the bottom side zipper panel, lay the panels out with right sides facing up. Just like before, we're going to use the pattern to locate the zipper edge, and that's going to be the curved edge on the outside, and we're going to stitch that edge to the opposite side of the zipper. I recommend marking the center on both the zipper and the panel. This will help keep the panels aligned as you're stitching them together. Sandwich the zipper in between both of the layers with right sides together, place a few pins because this is a curved edge, so it can be a little bit tricky to sew, and then we're going to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching, flip the wrong sides together, lining up the zipper edge and the top edge. Place a few pins to keep both sides lined up, and then we're going to add a top stitch to that zipper edge. For the best results, I recommend using an edge presser foot to minimize imperfections. If done correctly, the outside edges of both panels should line up perfectly. If they're off just a little bit, you're totally fine. You can move on to the next step and everything should stay aligned as you sew. But anyways, moving on, grab your main front assembly, and we're going to line up the bottom edge of the bottom side zipper panel to the outside edge of the main assembly. What I like to do is mark the center on both of the panels and start at that center and pin outwards. So with the right sides together, I'm going to start by placing a pin in that top center and moving my way down the sides. Feel free to place as many pins as you need, and just keep in mind the more you place, the more accurate the stitch will be. In this one, I'm going to be doing a little bit differently. I'm going to start at that top center point, sew one side, and then go back to that top center point and sew the opposite side. And remember, we're sewing at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, we're going to trim the zipper ends flush with the seam allowance. Before moving on, it's best to flip the right sides out, double check the seam, make sure all the layers got stitched together. If everything is looking good, we can flip the wrong sides back out, and this next step is optional. We're going to be cleaning up that raw edge on the inside. To do this, we're going to be using double fold bias tape, and I'm going to be showing you a few different techniques. So if you're new to sewing, you can still add it, even if you don't have the right machines. The first method is using a bias tape making kit. In this technique, you make your own double-sided bias tape to the size and fabric you want to use. All you do is cut your strips, feed it through your folder, and press it when it comes out the folder. It's very easy to do, and you get to customize the bias tape to your exact measurements. The second technique is using a double fold bias tape binder. This is the most efficient technique. You cut your strips, feed it through your binder, and sew it directly to your raw edge. And the last technique is using pre-made double fold bias tape. You are limited to colors, but it's very easy to use. You fold it over the edge and stitch it down. And you want to make sure you apply it all the way around the outside edge. I'm going to be using the double fold bias tape attachment. By far, this is the most effective technique, so if you plan on making a lot of bags, I recommend dedicating an entire machine to this process. Also, when you add the bias tape, it makes the bag stronger than just a standard lining. And when you push the right sides out with that bias tape, you're going to notice that your curved edges are going to stand out and look way better. But for now, that's going to complete our full front assembly so we can place it off to the side and grab both of our strap panels. When it comes to making the strap, there's a couple ways you can do this. You can either sew the panels together or add bias tape. If you're adding bias tape, you're going to place the wrong sides together and bias tape the outside edge. But for the video, I'm not going to be adding the bias tape. I'm going to be placing the right sides together and stitching the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And since this is a strap panel, you don't have to use a secondary fabric. You can swap it out for a perforated foam. This will make that strap a lot more comfy when you're wearing it on your shoulder. If you're using a perforated foam like this, you can actually double the layers to make it even softer, or you can add a lining to the inside between both of the layers. I've tried all different types of straps on different bags, and I found that double layering the perforated foam makes for the best outcome. And again, play around with it, find what works best for you. The second thing is customizing the size of the strap. You can play around with the width to make it wider or shorter. As long as you don't go wider than the actual width of the bag, you're good to go. But anyways, with the right sides together, we're going to stitch the outside edge, leaving the top edge open. And remember, we're stitching at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching, locate the opening at the top of the panel and flip the right sides out. As you can see, I went with the double perforated foam. It makes it nice and soft, and it'll be really comfy on the shoulder. Just like in previous steps, we're going to line up the outside edges and add a top stitch. If you are using multiple layers, it can be a little bit bulky, so just take your time as you're sewing. Another quick tip, matching your thread color to your fabric color helps hide any imperfections. Using the pattern, we're going to place it over the top, locate the webbing placement guide. You can chalk it out or use it as a reference point. Cut a 5-inch strip of 1-inch webbing and add a D-ring. Roll the webbing ends inward and place it on the webbing placement guide. From here you can stitch it down, but I'm going to be showing you a second option if you want to utilize the full space of the strap. Cut a piece of webbing shorter than the length of the strap, place it in the center with the D-ring at the bottom. And for this technique, we're going to be spacing out the stitches so that way it creates loops so we can clip things too. I spaced my stitches 2 inches apart and ended at the bottom D-ring. This does add a little bit more time to the project, but in the end, you're going to have a more functional strap. If you want to take it a step further, you can create a separate pocket that attaches to the strap. With our strap complete, we can place it off to the side and grab both of our inside pocket panels. Just like the pocket in the beginning, we're going to lay the panels out, place the right sides together, and stitch the top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip the wrong sides together, lining up both the layers, place a few pins, and when you have the layers lined up, we're going to add 2 top stitches to that top edge. After stitching, we can slide this panel to the side and grab our main back panels. Line up the main back panels with wrong sides together, flip the panel around so the secondary fabric is facing up, line up the inside pocket on the bottom edge and place a few pins. Flip the panel back around, cut 2 3-inch strips of webbing, add your D-rings to the webbing, fold the webbing in half and place them near the bottom just before the curve starts to go inwards. Repeat this for the opposite side and make sure both of them are lined up perfectly with one another. Next, we're going to grab the strap assembly and place it on the top edge with about a 1/2 inch hanging off directly in the center. Once you have everything pinned down, we're going to stitch as close as we can to the outside edge, locking down all of the components. And this is going to help keep everything aligned for the next step when we add the back panel to the main body assembly. So grab the main body assembly and flip the wrong sides out, mark the centers on both the top and the bottom, do the same for the back panel, and we're going to place the right sides together, lining up the centers on both of the panels. Just like when we attach the zipper assembly, you're going to want to place a lot of pins around that outside edge so everything stays aligned as you're sewing it. With all the pins in place, we're going to stitch the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And remember, just to take your time, this is a more difficult stitch. And don't be afraid to de-thread and try it again if it doesn't line up after stitching. Snip the webbing and the strap ends flush with the seam allowance. Before we add the double fold bias tape, it's best to flip the right sides out so we can see the layers and make sure everything's stitched together. If everything is looking good, we can flip the wrong sides back out, locate that raw edge on the inside, and add our double fold bias tape. To save time, I added it the same way using the same machine. So we're going to keep the video moving, flip the right sides back out, flip the bag around to the back side, and the last thing we have to do is finish the webbing connecting strap. So we can place the complete bag off to the side and grab a 1-yard strip of 1-inch width webbing. You can make it smaller, but I like to start a little bit bigger and then you can trim it down after you try it on. For the hardware, I'm going to be using 2 lobster clasps and 1 strap slider. Both are 1-inch width to match the 1-inch width webbing. Start by adding the strap slider and moving it down the webbing about 1 foot. Grab a clasp and add it to the same side. Then we're going to grab that webbing end and feed it back through the strap slider. Feed it from the outside opening and back down through the inside opening. Pull the end out about 2 to 4 inches, roll it over, and add a pin. Before we stitch this side down, we're going to move to the opposite side of the webbing. Add your second clasp, roll the webbing end over twice to hide the raw edge, and place a pin. Once you have both sides ready, we're going to tack stitch each webbing end down using a zigzag stitch or a straight stitch. To make it extra strong, you can add another tack stitch or a box stitch. As you can see, you pull the strap slider to adjust the size, and if it's still too big, you can de-thread one of the sides and trim it down. From here, all we have to do is grab the bag and clip it on. You have 2 options, so you can wear this on either side, so some days it might feel good one way, and you can switch it up and wear it the other way. And the reason we made that webbing strap a little bit shorter is because the main strap takes up most of the length. So the more you cut down that webbing strap, the more of the actual soft strap will be on your shoulder. It's another thing you can play around with to make it custom for your measurements. And the final step is adding branding. I use leather strips added with double-sided rivets. You can place them all around the bag to match your style. And the fun thing about this bag is that it's an open layout, so you can add pockets of your own and different things to customize it for your use. Like this little O-ring up front, I just clipped it on with a piece of leather. So definitely have some fun with it and play around with the design.
And there you have it, your sling bag is complete. Hopefully yours turned out great. If you're new to sewing and you didn't get it on the first try, don't worry, these things do take time, but over time you will build the skills to make any style bag. Like always, I want to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing, but until then, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.